Hi everyone, welcome back to Dr. Han's Pharmacy Classroom Pro. Now in this video, let's quickly review how gastric acid is regulated during the three phases of digestion. Now there are three main pathways that can regulate gastric acid secretion. Now in the neurocrine pathway, nerves in the stomach lining respond to various stimuli such as the sight and smell of food, leading to the release of acetylcholine. And acetylcholine then binds to M3 receptors on parietal cells, triggering the secretion of gastric acid. In the hormonal pathway, G cells or gastrin cells in the stomach release gastrin in response to the presence of food. Now, gastrin in turn stimulates parietal cells by binding to CCK2 receptors, leading to the secretions of gastric acid. And finally, in the paracrine pathway, within the gastric mucosa, there are local factors like histamine released from enterochromaffin-like or ECL cells. The histamine activates H2 receptors on parietal cells, further promoting acid secretion. Now, while somatostatin is released from D cells and activates SSTR2 receptors on parietal cells to inhibit gastric acid secretion. So, how do all these pathways work together? And let's find out. Well, I think a lot of people like eating donut, so let's explain the three phases of digestion with a donut eating story. The cephalic phase of the digestion is the initial stage of digestion that begins even before food enters the stomach. It is primarily triggered by sensory stimuli such as the sight, smell, taste, and even thought of food. And in response to these cues, the brain sends signals to the stomach and other digestive organs to prepare for food intake. Now, this preparation includes the release of saliva containing digestive enzymes and the secretions of gastric juices, including stomach acid, in anticipation of food. The cephalic phase helps prime the digestive system for effective or efficient food breakdown and nutrient absorption once the meal is consumed. Now, acetylcholine plays a pivotal role in the intricate regulations of gastric acid secretion within the stomach. Specifically, acetylcholine or ACH exerts its influence by directly stimulating parietal cells through the M3 receptor, prompting them to secrete hydrochloric acid. Additionally, another key player in this process is the G cell, which releases the hormone gastrin. Gastrin in turn acts on the parietal cells by binding to the CCK2 receptor, further encouraging the secretions of gastric acid. Now, the coordinated interplay between acetylcholine and gastrin demonstrate how complex this regulatory pathways in the stomach. Now, both acetylcholine and gastrin plays a crucial role, and these signaling molecules stimulate enterochromaffin-like or ECL cells within the stomach lining, promoting them to release histamine. Histamine in turn exerts its influence on parietal cells by binding to H2 receptors, ultimately leading to the secretions of hydrochloric acid. Now, this cascade of events highlights the sophisticated interplay between various cellular components, ensuring optimal conditions for digestion within the stomach. Now, note that acetylcholine, gastrin, and histamines are available even before food intake. The stomach phase of the digestion occurs when food enters the stomach after the initial cephalic phase. In the stomach, food is mixed with gastric juices containing hydrochloric acid and pepsin, which together break down proteins and create an acidic environment. The stomach muscles churn and mix the food into a semi-liquid substance known as chyme. Now, initially, the presence of food stimulates the vagus nerve, triggering a series of events in the stomach, and degraded proteins further amplifies this response, leading to the release of gastrin from the gastrin cell. Now, in turn, gastrin stimulates the production of gastric acid. Now, notably, during the stomach phase of digestion, more than half of the total acid is released to aid in food breakdown. Now, however, to prevent excessive acidity and a built-in safety mechanisms come into play. When stomach's pH drops below 3, indicating an excess of acid, these cells are activated to release somatostatin, and this hormone binds to SSTR2 receptors on parietal cells, effectively inhibiting the release of additional acid, therefore maintaining a delicate balance of gastric acid secretion. This intricate regulation ensures that the stomach maintains an optimum pH level for digestion without causing harm to the gastric lining. And finally, the intestinal phase of digestion occurs in the small intestine and is primarily responsible for regulating the rate of digestion and absorptions of nutrients. Now, it begins when partially digested food or chyme enters the small intestine from the stomach. And when food enters the small intestine, it exerts an inhibitory effect on the release of gastrin. And as gastrin level decreases, there is a subsequent reduction in stimulation to both parietal cells and ECL cells, leading to a decrease in the secretions of gastric acid. Notably, certain components of chyme such as lipids, hyperosmotic substances like salt and acetic chyme activates these cells to release somatostatin. This hormone in turn binds to the SSTR2 receptors on parietal cells and effectively putting a brake on acid release. Now, in order for acid to release in the stomach, we rely on a component called proton pump. The proton pump is also called the hydrogen potassium ATPase, and is activated primarily through the actions of histamine, gastrin, and acetylcholine, which bind to their respective receptors on the parietal cell membrane. Now, before stimulation, proton pumps are present in the cytoplasm of parietal cells. Histamine binds to H2 receptors, while gastrin binds to the CCK2 receptors, and acetylcholine binds to M3 receptors. Now, when these receptors are activated, they trigger intracellular signaling pathways that ultimately lead to the activations of the proton pump. And after activation, proton pumps move to the plasma membrane of the parietal cell. Now, let's put everything together and have a summary. The digestion occurs in 3 main phases: the cephalic phase, the gastric phase, and the intestinal phase. And in the cephalic phase, sensory cues such as sight, smell, and taste of food triggers the brain to prepare the digestive system for incoming food. Saliva is released, and gastric juices are primed for action. The gastric phase commences when food enters the stomach, and it involves the mechanical churning of food mixes with gastric juices, including hydrochloric acid, to break down into the semi-liquid form called chyme. And gastric hormones like gastrin are released to further stimulate the gastric acid secretion. And finally, in the intestinal phase, as chyme enters the small intestines, the regulations of the gastric acid is slowed down or inhibited by somatostatin binding to the SSTR2 receptors. Now, all of these 3 phases place together to ensure the food is effectively digested and its nutrients are absorbed to nourish the body. Now, that is all for this quick review of gastric acid secretions and inhibitions. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time. Take good care. Bye.